Welcome to dentReviews. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Chord Mojo DAC and amplifier all in one unit. This is a really nice little unit. I'm just going to jump right in. It supports coax, USB for data, a charging port, optical input, and it has 2 headphone outputs, which is an awesome feature. I really like that. When you're sharing headphones in the car or trying to show somebody something through headphones, it really can be challenging to do that with a Y cable that lowers the volume and sometimes adds noise and changes impedance and alters the frequency, blah 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 blah, etc. etc. So this is great. It's got 2 discrete headphone amps. It also has some interesting power button and volume button balls here. I don't know if you can hear or see that, but they roll. I feel like I'm playing an old Marble Madness video game or something. They feel really smooth. Clearly indicated volume and power button icons. And one interesting feature of this amplifier is that when you power it on, you'll see that these balls are colored lights. And what's nice about that is that it's very easy to look at them and see specific information. For instance, I don't have it connected to a device right now, but if I were to plug the USB cable in and connect it to my computer, this would indicate what sample rate I'm connected to. And you can see here on the box, it shows you the colors. So if you're getting 44 kilohertz, it'll light up red, blue for 192, etc. So that's pretty useful. It's nice information. Also, the volume buttons indicate the state of the volume with color. So if I was to hold this to turn it down, you can see it slowly notching down to different colors. I'm just holding it right now to indicate at what level the volume is at. You can also tap it, more discreetly. But that's a very nice visual indicator of where the volume is at, and I like that. It's a reasonably heavy amp. I don't really have a lot of amps this size to compare it to, but it's heavier than the JDS by just a little bit. It feels good in your hand. It feels solid. I will say that. It feels like it's very well constructed. I get the impression that it's pretty tough. It's put together. It's nice materials. There's also a power indicator and charging indicator light there. It just feels robust. Like, I don't feel like it's a cheap amp. I feel like it's a nice, well-made amplifier. So what do I like about it the most? I like that it's very silent. The background noise when you connect a sensitive pair of headphones or earphones is very black. It's very quiet, so there's no hiss. And that's very important because that just creates a very good sense of space and clarity when there's no noise to muddle up the signal in an amplifier. So I really do like that aspect of it. You can see here just some brief specifications on this that the output power at 1 kilohertz is 600 ohms, 35 milliwatts, 8 ohms, 720 milliwatts. Output impedance is 75 milliohms, so that's less than 1 ohm. That's very important with balanced armature earphones. The general rule of thumb is you want at least 1/8 of the output impedance of the impedance of your earphone. So for instance, if you have an earphone that is 16 ohms, you want to make sure that you have something, close to 1/8 of that in order to get the appropriate frequency response from that earphone and not have any drastic alteration. So typically speaking, what's considered very, very good is anything less than 1 ohm. That's typically sought after for a lot of very sensitive balanced armature earphones. So this is 0.75 or 75 milliohms. That's very good. Dynamic range is superb. 125 decibels is excellent. Total harmonic distortion is very, 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 very low, so that's excellent too. And there's the weight right there. It's 0.4 pounds, 180 grams in the size. And these are the formats that it supports, and it supports a lot of formats. DSD. It shows you the various bit rates and everything here, and it's a very competent DAC. It comes with the 2 headphone jacks, which are built onto the device. It comes with a charging cable, and that's in this case right here. So it's just a small charging cable, and it's just packaged in this small box. Nothing special, clean, simple. Instructions on how to use it. Tells you how to charge it and everything to make sure everything works properly. Some information from them. There's little chord words on there. I don't know if you can see this in the light. So that's basically it. Sound quality. What do I think of it? I think it's superb. I would definitely consider this a reference amplifier. Now, when I say reference, that means a lot of things. In my mind, primarily, it means that it's to the point at which you can't hear any more improvements. So the point of no further improvements are possible, or diminishing returns are incredibly small, so you're at that real point of diminishing returns. That's what I consider reference. So like the JDS C5D, that's an awesome DAC. They have a new element which I haven't heard, but by specifications and from the same company, I'm guessing is very similar in terms of their reference quality. This is also reference, and I pitted this against all my regular devices, my iPhone, my Sansa Fuse player, my professional Apogee interface, my laptop's output, and I did so using this. This is a custom switch I designed, so I have the headphones here, and on the other side I have two inputs. This is completely discrete, good thick gauge wire conductors inside, so there's no electronics or anything to interfere with it. It's just a simple discrete switch, physical switch, and I connect one here, one here. I do a proper volume match and a double blind test whenever I test any of this stuff, and that's another video I'll have to make. But needless to say, in testing this, I'm gonna say my audio impression is inconclusive. At a minimum, I believe this to be reference, meaning that I cannot tell that there is anything with the Mojo that is any less than any of the better players that I've heard, such as the Sansa Fuse or the Apogee Duet. I don't see anything lacking in this amp. There are times when I feel like I think this amp is better, and that very well could be the very dark and silent background noise, because some earphones, like the new ER4SR, have just the slightest amount of background noise on things like the Sansa Fuse. Very, very slight, probably inaudible to most people until you sit there with a switch and say, oh, okay, yeah, I can hear that slight amount of noise. The Mojo has none of that, so it is a very dark, very quiet background. That could be why I'm getting an impression sometimes that this may be better than that or whatever, but what I find in general as I do the A-B comparison is that whether I do it quickly, back and forth, or listen for extended periods and then switch and listen further, the average statistically is that I can't conclusively guess which one is which in my mind shows that there's no significant difference. If I had to go out on a limb, I would say if you absolutely made me choose, this would be the better of the various models that I've heard, primarily because of that background noise. I also like the minute amount of volume change you can do. It has very small steps. I'm going to guess they're within a half decibel volume steps as you click each button, which I think is a very fine and smooth adjustment. You can hold the two volume buttons down while it's on, and it will change brightness to either dim or bright. And it's not as bright as you see in the camera here. In real life, those are kind of a pinkish red right now. They look white in the camera. See if I can turn down the brightness maybe. So basically, if you look at this in a dimmer mode, you can see now that there's more color to it. And when you hold the buttons down, they go dim. And I can change the volume here so you can see it better. So there's red. And if I hold it, they're bright red or dim red. So that's a little trick there. And also, if you turn the unit off and you hold both volume buttons while you power the unit back on, it goes into line level mode. So make sure you do not have your headphones plugged in when you do that, because you might blow your eardrums. But that's one way to go into line level mode, and it defaults to being off the next time you turn it on according to the manual. I have not tested that because I don't want to blow my eardrums, but that's another feature. And if you turn the volume up to double blue, I believe the manual says is the equivalent of line output as well. This thing will power anything from an 8 ohm earphone to a 800 ohm earphone, and it's very, very capable with the formats, the power, and the connectivity for pretty much anything you're going to throw at it. It's just a very nice little device. The charging port here has an indicator, and that also goes from, I believe, yellow to red and blue in different stages based on the percentage, 25, 50, 75, 100. You can also charge it while you're listening to music. That does work. And let's see, is there anything else that I wanted to note? Did I mention it's awesome? It's made in England, and it's, I believe, machined from one piece of aluminum, they say on their website. There's not a lot of information on some of the specifics. It's interesting. They give you certain information, not other information. Like there's no information on the battery life that I could find easily. But I did read on a forum post that someone said it was rated at 10 hours and it takes about 4 hours to charge. I don't know if I get full 10 hours with it. I don't do my listening in 8-hour to 10-hour chunks, and I don't measure my listening time. But I would say I've probably got between 8 and 9 actual hours of battery usage. So it's got a great battery. It does get a little bit warm with use, and that's expected. That's a normal functionality according to the company. It doesn't get uncomfortably warm, but it does get warm, and some people might say, oh no, what's happening? Is it overheating? But it does have circuitry to shut off if it's overheating, so you don't have to worry about that. Here's a side-by-side next to a JDS Labs. This is a switch, but it's the same exact case as the C5 amp that I have, which is put away. But this is the size comparison. You can see it's a little bit smaller and a little bit thinner, not much, but just a little bit, and a little bit thicker, but not by that much. So it's a pretty compact amp, and what I do like about it, honestly, is the JDS Labs is a very slim and slightly lighter weight amplifier. It feels really good in your hand. It's got nice controls, and it's kind of a standard, simple, minimal design. I love it. It's probably one of my favorite DAC amps. The Chord is a little bit more hand size, and you can put this in your hand and hold it. As a matter of fact, not only can you do that, but you can use the buttons pretty easily for volume that way or this way. So I'm kind of torn between the ergonomics of this being small and fitting in your hand well, and this, which may not be uncomfortable. I mean, it fits in your hand well, but you can't really access any of the controls one-handed easy. Normally the volume is right here, so you know, do that, or you maybe do this, but usually you use two hands, whereas with the Chord, it's pretty easy to just use one hand and rotate it around. So ergonomically, I'd say this is probably the better of the two. It has very good capabilities of high fidelity audio formats, so just all in all, I think you can't really beat it. Would I say that I need to go out and jump and buy one of these? Probably not. Again, I hear very little, if any, discernible difference under, you know, really good blind testing. However, the impression that I get overall is that if there were a better one, it would be this. That may just be subjective, it may be nonsense, but that is my impression. I feel like there were a few times where I picked this one, and even if statistically there were 50-50, I still felt like I picked it because I really did discern some small noticeable thing. Like, for instance, in one recording specifically that I remember, I was listening to the drums of a snare hit, like a snare, like ka, ka, ka. And on the Fuse and the iPhone and all the other players, I could swear that I heard like a sort of harshness in the snare, not like a frequency response or bad quality harshness, but almost as if the power the amp was putting into that dynamic snap had some sort of like overdrive to it, like a sort of how would I, like just almost a bad dynamic attack, not less dynamic or more dynamic, but just something about it sounded odd. And when I heard the Mojo, which I didn't know at the time because it was a blind test, it sounded more natural and lifelike. Not brighter, but just more natural. Like, it's hard to explain other than the drum sounded like a drum, and on the others the drum sounded like it had a weird, like almost like an extra energy to it that wasn't dynamic, but the only thing I could compare it to is if you're familiar with recording audio, it almost sounded like something was a little hot, like it was at the verge of clipping, but it wasn't clipping, whereas this made it that it was just in the natural boundary of well below clipping. Again, it didn't sonically sound different. The volume was the same, the frequency was the same, the mix and the balance was the same. Everything was identical, but I had that impression that I'm talking about. And when I thought about it, I said, okay, number one is definitely more natural sounding. It was the Mojo. And that happened like a few times where I had that same impression. So what I would have to put that down to is that this is probably a little bit more power and cleaner power. And if I had to guess, It was the power that's driving the earphone and its cleanliness and also lack of background noise all together, just making it a very smooth and natural attack. I felt like the other gear lacked that in just a very, very small amount. But again, and I have to stress this, in a double-blind test, statistically, I could not guess between this and the other devices accurately, which shows that at a minimum, it's an incredibly infinitesimal difference. Now, I haven't had this for a very long time. I've had it maybe for a few weeks. So maybe listening to this exclusively and nothing else, I may grow to hear a little bit more subtle differences in the experience, and that's very possible. I've had that happen with earphones. You get used to a sound and you start to be able to identify more microscopically what might be wrong with that sound. Given that, I'm going to stick with my conclusion that I can't reliably tell a difference between them all, but if I had to give the edge to any device, it would be the Mojo. That's my impression. I would highly recommend this at about, I think it's $500 or $600. I think this is an excellent value. And when I say excellent value, there's a few caveats. You can get the JDS Labs C5D for about half that price. And the JDS Labs C5D is a superb amplifier with a little bit slimmer form factor, and it just is a great all-around device. How do they compare? Again, with the double-blind testing, I'd say that would be twice the value. But this is just a very nice form factor with the volume controls. It's different, but it's easy to use. It works well. I like the visual input. It feels well made, and sonically, again, if there was an edge, that edge to some people may be worth that extra money. Now, there are amplifiers that do not give an edge in quality that are $1,000 plus. So in that regard, in the, let's say, $0 to $1,000 range, this is a superb value. I truly believe this is an excellent amplifier. It seems well made. It does well, has good battery life, has good indicators, has good sound quality. It's just, I would say it's great. The JDS C5D is also great, and I'd say it's a little bit more towards a personal opinion, personal preference based on what you're looking for. The JDS Labs does not have two headphone outputs. So, I mean, you might argue that if you use that feature a lot, it's worth the extra money. The JDS Labs does not have an optical or a coax. So you may find that that is an improvement that you would pay the extra money for. You may just really like the controls. You may really like the functionality, compatibility, whatever. So I think it's definitely a good value. I personally am not going to probably go out and buy one, only because I feel like my equipment I have now is currently adequate and there's no significant enough difference for me. If you don't own a DAC and you're on the fence, I would say the Mojo is definitely a great amp if it's in your budget. I think it's attractive, it sounds great, and it's within a decent price range for an amp of its size and its style. It has plenty of power and it has plenty of connectivity options, so I highly recommend it. Thanks to Neural Sagan for letting me borrow this, and if you have any questions about this, just leave them underneath the review and I'll try to get back to you. And thank you very much for watching.